Welcome to Decoding the Interview and this week's Swing Out Sister. Best known for Breakout, their story goes far deeper. From childhood escapes into music to art school honesty to finding beauty in struggle. We'll explore how wounds shaped their songs, how creativity became therapy, and how joy and melancholy live side by side in their music. And we'll uncover the secret to their longevity as artists and as a couple.
I think we're both quite pragmatic, and I think we, if there's something to our credit, I think we dealt with success and the lack of success with equal, equanimity.
For Swing Out Sister, this balance between joy and disappointment echoes in their music. The optimism of Breakout alongside the melancholy of Somewhere Deep in the Night. Their resilience mirrors what psychologists call radical acceptance, the ability to hold joy and pain together without being destroyed by both.
One of the first records I really remember listening to on a stereogram was River Deep, Mountain High. And I can remember looking inside, it was probably about 3 or 4, looking inside the stereogram to see where the echo was coming from, because it just had that Phil Spector wall of sound and I couldn't understand it.
My dad had 2 records, I think. Johnny Cash, Boy Called Sue, and Satchmo. And he played those 2, back to back.
I did sing in front of my grandma. She was always very keen to get me to play the guitar and sing Olivia Newton-John songs. But the first time I sang, I didn't tell my family. I entered a talent contest at school. So it was a bit like Pop Idol. We were called Triangle, and because I love Pentangle and their theme for Take 3 Girls, Light Flight. There were only 3 of us, so we were Triangle. And I played the guitar, all 3 chords. My best friend was really pretty, so she was doing backing vocals. And the music teacher, who told me, you'll never get anywhere in music because you don't play a classical instrument. I asked his daughter if she wanted to sing backing vocals because she'd be good at harmonies. And I thought, at least we'll get somewhere. We came 4th.
You know what it was? The music that I remember from childhood, and I think this is true of everybody, is going on holiday to Cornwall or somewhere in the car, and what was on the radio. So it would be Burt Bacharach, and that was the Jimmy Webb songs of the day, and that idea that's kind of the mix and match thing where you'd hear Hawkwind and then you'd hear whoever, the Carpenters on radio. There was no kind of format radio then.
I love Motown and I love Michael Jackson. I wanted to marry him because I thought he was the same age as me, but it turns out he's lying about his age and he was a year older than me. He was on top of the pops at the age of 9. I was going, I want to do that. But then David Bowie came along. And I was the same. It was like, this is where I want to be. I don't know what he is. I don't know whether I should fancy him. He makes me feel funny. Is he a girl? Is he a boy? It's kind of this strange sexuality.
It was never something that accompanied our daily lives. It was a thing that you, as you say, escaped into. And I think we were often accused, have been often accused of being escapist. And I always took that as the highest compliment. I never understood it was supposed to be an insult.
Childhood music wasn't background noise, it was an emotional escape hatch. For Corinne, the aura of sound was almost mystical. Sound as mystery, sound as wonder. For Andy, the eclectic radio of the 70s trained him in contradiction, where Bacharach coexisted with Hawkwind. Both described music as a portal out of daily life. What others dismissed as escapism was, in fact, therapy. Music was a rehearsal for survival, a way of transcending the ordinary. This thread, escape as healing, has run throughout their career.
I suppose I grew up in the countryside, moved from Nottingham to the countryside, was a bit of a country bumpkin, and that was a perfect place for your imagination, dreaming. And I just thought, one day I'd like to be a singer, and I'd like to design my own clothes, a bit like Diana Ross in Mahogany. That would have been my dream. It's like, whoa, you can design your own clothes and then go and sing in them. I went to Lincoln Art School, and very luckily, all of the tutors there had come from the Royal College of Art, and they were very... they were really pushing their students to do well. I wanted to go to Manchester or Nottingham, and I got into St Martin's. I had to put 3 choices, and I said, I don't really want to go to London. I was a bit scared of going to London. And they go, you'll bloody well go. If you've got into St Martin's, you don't refuse a place there. And I don't think I realised quite how important it was. I mean, I left school when I was 60. You were meant to go there have 2 A levels, and I kind of did some A levels on my foundation course and managed to somehow scrape through. I think I was very lucky, and I had some great tutors who were really encouraging.
As an outsider looking in at that St Martin's thing, very much the same as the factory thing, there's an energy of not that many people. There's a small group of people all very energetically pursuing something in a very often obnoxious way, but a very convinced by themselves.
And we had great visiting lecturers like Vivian Westwood and Malcolm McLaren had turned up one day, and the Sex Pistols were modelling in life drawing classes. It was kind of just such a weird collection of clashing cultures. It was great. I'd grown up on a farm and got some great farm overalls, so I turned up in a 1940s milkmaid's overall and some plaits and drew freckles on my face and some Wellingtons and accentuated the country bumpkin. So maybe it's just honesty. Don't try to be something that you are not, and people will probably appreciate your honesty. And I think that comes through in our music, really.
Corinne would be out with friends, and people would just be stopping and laughing. Like, look, what are you doing? What are you dressed in? And I could see you, Corinne, and your friends loving the idea of that. And to me, there was energy there. There was a real kind of something was happening. You could feel it.
We had a lot of things to fight against and survive through, but I also think a lot of it was to do with class. I mean, I think a lot of people who made that headway, this thing, social mobility, became a kind of tag in hindsight. But I think there were working class kids who'd been given a grant provided by a Labour government to get into art schools, to do something and make something out of themselves. And then by the time we were flourishing, it was the 80s and the Thatcher era, so there was money to be had as well. But we'd had this determination that came from nothing.
Corinne's art school honesty, refusing to play a role and turning up in milkmaid's overalls, became the foundation of her artistry. Honesty in creativity is risky. It invites ridicule, as Andy recalls, with people laughing at her appearance. But laughter becomes fuel, and the outsider stance becomes an identity. Social mobility, working class kids in art school adds another layer. Their determination to rise from nothing is rooted in class wounds, and their later struggles with labels and industry rejection echo this same battle. And all this resurfaces in how they transform pain and rejection into deeper, more authentic music.
It was going to be electro pop, and then Paul O'Duffy who had the idea of putting the horns, getting a horn arrangement. And all of a sudden it became this thing that none of us had predicted, which I think are always the best things. It's like the thing that just arrives as an amalgam of all your various bits and something else you didn't see coming.
Is this something that sort of connects with the idea of being obstinate?
I suppose so, because I think the truth of it is, that's not the sound of one person being obstinate. That's everybody along the line being completely obstinate and not changing what they're doing. And it becomes something that nobody's actually made. We've all contributed to, it's the Casablanca theory, isn't it? It's like you get so many writers, nobody's actually telling the story anymore.
I think also that was one of the early records that we made, of the early songs that we wrote together. And so Andy was weather reporter Joe Zawinul with a bit of Bacharach thrown in. I wanted to be Shirley Bassey or Michael Jackson with a bit of Dionne Warwick thrown in. Martin, meanwhile, he was in magazines, so there was the punk and the more rock element. He'd been in the Chameleons after that. I mean, it was such an odd mix of ingredients that we managed to make it work and pull it off. It's just a miracle, really.
And because it was so out of step, it's hard to imagine if you go back and think, what were people playing at that time? And put that in the mix. And it was such a ridiculously different sound to Flock of Seagulls or whoever it might have been. It just caught everyone off guard, and as soon as you heard it on the radio, you just felt better. It was just one of those.
I think we, from the start, wanted to create something that was timeless, but also to make music and a record that made people feel the way we felt when we heard something fantastic, like wow, when you hear ABC by the Jacksons, or Teen Town by Weather Report. When you hear that record that just makes you leap up and feel happy, we wanted to do that.
Here is the paradox of creation: obstinacy plus accident. None of them compromised, so their different wounds and influences collided into something new. Therapy often works the same way, not by design, but through unexpected collisions of memory, emotion, and stubbornness. Their desire to make people feel better shows music as collective therapy. Their sound became a medicine, not just for themselves, but for listeners too.
And they wanted to use Breakout, and they said Electra completes her transition. She's got a syringe in her hand, and I didn't really take much notice of the transition bit, and I thought, oh, is this about someone taking heroin? But I thought, well, it seems like an interesting story. But then we suddenly got all this adulation from gay friends in New York. I'm thinking, what's all this about? You've got the perfect spot, and it's the pivotal moment in Pose, but it was on some kind of obscure cable channel. Then later, a couple of years later, it was on the BBC, and it's like, wow, some things, are really surprising. You kind of think it's a little independent production, and it takes the world by storm. And it was a proud moment to have Breakout included in that.
It felt for me also a little bit full circle, because how I remember Breakout was what I said before about during the AIDS era, this very upbeat, positive song during an era that was very negative. Do you know what I mean? I mean, this is from a gay man's perspective, obviously, but and so for me, it felt full circle in the extent that it fitted Pose perfectly.
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah, it does close the circle. Yeah, but that was the thing in America. I hadn't noticed that. Certainly when I say America, LA and West Coast and East Coast, New York and LA, but there was very much that, when we went over there, the audience, a lot of the audience was the gay following, because it was kind of almost an anthem, at that time.
Breakout reveals another truth: songs outgrow their makers. What began as optimism in Thatcher's 80s became survival music for communities then under siege. The gay community heard in Breakout what they needed most: joy in the face of fear. This is a recurring pattern in Swing Out Sisters' career. The private wound becomes public therapy. Their songs transcend autobiography and become vessels for collective healing.
You don't need therapy, you write songs. And I think it does serve as that, and I remember when Paul McCartney's memoirs came out and he did them song by song. And they said, oh, did you keep a diary? And he said, no, you don't need to really keep a diary when you write music, because it's like Andy says, that kind of gets to some part of your brain that nothing else could. You just hear that sound, and it might be a keyboard sound, it might be a chord or a lyric, and it's like, whoa, you're back there. It's always a difficult one listening to what you've already recorded, because I think you tend to think, well, we've done that, we should be moving on to the next thing. And it takes about 3 years at least before you can listen to something and not notice all the things like, oh, I should have done that differently, we could have changed this bit, why didn't we include that? It takes quite a while to be able to stand back and listen objectively, if ever. If
you have memories, you associate them with music. It's the power of it. And I think to have that many memories suddenly descend upon you of your life at various stages in your life, it's a very, well, we've said it before, it was a very emotional thing. Somewhere deep in the night, there were a lot, that has a great melancholy. I mean, I love it. It's a beautiful melancholy, but there were a lot of things going on that were not good from, emotionally and in terms of your life, things that we had a couple of people, depart and in bad circumstances, and it just, you can feel the weight. There's melancholy. It feels melancholic, and I think I do like melancholy in music anyway. And I think there's a lot of it in ours over the years. But like as you say, yes, that you can chart certain periods when you thought, "Whoa, we were really struggling there." It turns out, what a beautiful struggle that was.
The same goes for Filth and Dreams. I think that was a bit of a dark time. I think it was because we actually had heard that we had been dropped by a record company. Somebody had let some gossip out of the can, and we found out, that by just some really horrible means. And so we were with Japan, and they were loyal. We still had a deal in Japan. And then Shapes and Patterns, we still had a deal in America. So we were kind of being tossed around. We felt a bit unwanted, but at the same time, we could get on with stuff, not quite so much under the spotlight. So I think it led us to delve a bit deeper into uncharted territory.
All the way from the start of this to the end of it, we've basically been washed up by this point. You know, it's like the first few albums we have tailed off. This is the dark ages now in terms of career, because nobody's paying attention, and Japan was a shot in the arm in terms of people being interested. You know, that you did have an audience who kind of listened to what you did and gave it credence, which we needed. You know, nobody, you can't work in a vacuum. As much as we'd like to pretend, you know, it's like it doesn't matter if people are listening. Of course it does. And yes, it turned out a lot of people were listening there, and to the extent that Now You're Not Here, which was the big hit in Japan off that record, sold in Japan because it crossed over because it was on their TV show. They used it for the TV theme, TV drama, which are massive in Japan, and so they released it to the domestic audience, and Now You're Not Here, the single of Now You're Not Here, sold in Japan more than the single of Breakout sold in the world. As it gets further away, you know, the idea that something will be heard, we almost, I wouldn't say celebrate it, but there's something healthy comes from it. You know, the idea that this won't mean a great deal to many people somehow will conversely make it even better than it needs to be, you know, for some perverse reason. And I think that goes back to Manchester and stubbornness and Corinne and Lincoln. You know, it's the idea that, first of all, don't be dissuaded from making it as good as it can be. And I'd like to think that the sound of this, and I'm glad that you've said that, because I do think it has got better, and I'm very proud of that.
And this is the psychological core of this story. In the middle of chaos, meaning's impossible to see. Only later does the shape appear. Just as in therapy, patterns only emerge with distance. Their melancholic albums are not indulgences in sadness, but transformations of it. Grief becomes song. Rejection becomes freedom. Japan's recognition acted like a therapeutic mirror, proof that they still mattered when others had abandoned them. Pain here is not erased, but transfigured into beauty. Their earliest idea of escapism, what once was a child's refuge in music, becomes in adulthood a survival strategy.
I think not being offended when we want to spend time apart is quite a good one. So Andy disappears off to his place, I'll stay in my place. Even when we're in the same house, we're in separate rooms, just knowing that we're there is enough. You don't always have to be together, and we both do completely different things in our spare time. You know, I think you just have to allow yourself some space. Most people have separate jobs and then they come together in their social life. And I mean, we have our, you know, mutual place for creating things, but we spend a lot of time apart. Sometimes people think, is everything all right between you two? Yep, it's fine.
Yeah, that's the key. That's definitely the key.
Now, don't forget, the full interview is available at the link on the screen, and look out for more in this series of Decoding the Interview.